So this session will be recorded and posted on the ANH Academy website following the conference. All participants have been muted, but please introduce yourselves in the chat and let us know your name and where you're joining us from and the organisation you work with. We encourage you to turn your video on during the session so we can see your faces, but if your connection isn't so good, then you can turn that off, no problem. Later on during the session, we'll open up the conversation to a Q&A. If you have any questions, please write these into the chat box throughout the session and we will make a note of them and raise them at the end during the Q&A. Finally, if you experience any technical issues, please check your audio settings and your internet connection. You can always try to reconnect to the session using the same Zoom link. If you have any questions about technical issues, please feel free to message me directly using the chat box. So thanks for listening and over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Lauren. First and foremost, let me welcome each and every one of us to this session. As you have heard, the session is titled Agriculture and Nutrition Interventions, a very, very important theme. As you know, everything we do, what we want to consume, we want to see how the nutrition, how the foodstuffs, how agriculture and various other sectors contribute to our well-being, our nutrition outcomes, how our body is responding. So this is important, and I would like to welcome you. Feel free. As you have heard, we have the chat box there. If you have questions, put in there and we shall deal with them. So we have 5 presenters. Each presenter is given 8 minutes, and we are happy to have Nazman Ratna from Lincoln University, who will be the first, who is one of the presenters. Then we have Achana Sankar from GIZ, Tomeo Bodia from CRAD, Diana Dolman from McGill University, and Kathleen Harrington from Michigan State University. We are really, really happy to have all of you here. We know some of the time zones are, very tough for you, but it is great that you honored us and decided to be awake at this time. So without much ado, I want to just say we have to keep time. The 8 minutes are at your disposal, presenters. So we are going to begin right away. So let me then allow Nazmun Ratna from Lincoln University to make her presentation, which is titled, Does Market Inclusion Help Farmers Eat Better? And this is evidence from vegetable aggregation schemes in Bangladesh. For your information, probably you already know, my name is Mark Korir. I am based at the African Economic Research Consortium, Nairobi, Kenya. Welcome, Ratna.
Thank you, Mark, for your introduction. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, as Mark has introduced, I am representing Lincoln University, and also I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues who are part of the MINI project, and MINI stands for Market Intervention for Nutritional Improvement. I know Dr. Gregory Cooper, who is one of the co-authors. He's also here, and he has presented many, many papers in previous academic weeks. So it's a pleasure to be here for the first time. So the question that we are asking, I'm trying to see why my, why can't I go to the, yeah. So let's start with the conceptual framework. So in the slide that I have uploaded, I have given a background of Loop. So just very briefly, Loop is an aggregation services which helps the farmers in Jashore in Bangladesh to integrate to the market which have higher demand for fruits and vegetables. So what happens there, the farmers themselves selected the aggregators, The aggregators collect their produce and they take that produce to the markets, to the wholesalers, and from there on it goes to the urban areas and more high demand markets. So as we have seen in the institutional economics literature, any sort of aggregation services help farmers to reduce their transaction cost and participate better in the market. So in this case, we see that a lot of the literature has focused on what we have identified in the conceptual framework in arrow 1, which means vegetable production through aggregation service allows farmer to have income generation. What we see in our contribution that we are linking that to the nutritional outcome. So I have to say from the very beginning, Loop was not necessarily targeted to have a nutritional intervention. So what we wanted to see is because of the higher income, whether that allows the farmers to have better food and nutrition security, and which is represented in pathway 2. And then we're also asking if this production, the higher production of fruits and vegetables, allow the farmers to have home consumption from their own production, which has not been done. And the reason we ask this question, does market inclusion help farmers to eat better, is because of the trade-off. Because of the aggregation services, farmers are now able to send their products to the higher demand market, which generates more income, but there could be a trade-off in terms of availability and affordability of fruits and vegetables in the local market, and also there could be substitutes with the home consumption. That's where our research lies. This is a very brief literature review where we see that the impact of collective action by farmers has been mixed across the world, and especially for smallholder farmers who are marginalized, and often the aggregation service doesn't necessarily help those farmers. So this is where we are going to look into 2 research objectives in this paper. The first is to identify the determinants of loop participation, and then we are going to look into not only the economic outcome, which has been focused in many of the other studies, we also would look into nutritional outcomes of loop participation by focusing on food insecurity and dietary diversity and home consumption of vegetables. So in terms of empirical strategy, because we have the problem of selection bias, the loop participation targeted the villages which are near the markets or bazaars. So we could not have the standard RCT causal relationship. So what we are trying to do here is to create a sample that would represent some degree of randomness. So to do that, we go through in 3 steps. First, we have a probit regression where we identify what is the determinants that increases the likelihood of participating in loop. And based on that, we develop the propensity scores and match the farmers with that propensity scores to identify who are very, very similar to the loop participants. And then we applied the augmented inverse probability weighting estimation, which is, again, that has not been seen in many of the studies. And this allows us to create a pseudo-random sampling. And those who are interested, I can elaborate more on the process. I'd rather go to the study area. So this is from Joshua district. So we had a multi-stage sampling. So we first selected 2 bazaars, and then we selected 2 villages which had loop participation and 2 villages which didn't have loop participation. Altogether, we surveyed 240 farmers. And as I have mentioned, that we tried to match the farmers between the loop villages and non-loop villages. among the 240 farmers, 235 farmers were matched. So they had similar observed characteristics. So definitely we cannot address the differences that have with the unobserved characteristics like we're able to do with randomness. But this tells us, as a first step, we looked into the difference between them. As you can see that they are slightly younger, the loop farmers compared to the non-loop farmers, but not a big difference. But they also have more land that is being cultivated for fruits and vegetables, and they have higher production of vegetables, as has been explained here. They have 2,774 kilo hires. This is for a year, so it is the per year average. So this is, I'm going direct into AIPW because I know I'm running out of time. And as you can see here that the economic outcomes, definitely there has been increased for the loop farmers. Both production is higher, net income is higher, sales revenue is higher. When we look at the food and nutrition outcomes, although we see that the dietary diversity, so the farmers are having more diverse food, and then they did not experience any limited food or they didn't have days without food. What is interesting here that the home consumption, our arrow 3, definitely did not show any statistically significant results. So that means that farmers are not necessarily having higher portion of their produced fruits and vegetable as their own consumption. And then just to be consistent with our result, we also did the propensity score matching. The results are very, very similar. And as you can see that the only difference is the production is not very different production is not statistically significant for the PSM estimation, but the rest of the results are similar. I will go, how many minutes am I left with, Lauren?
Please continue with your conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, so the key conclusion that we can look into that aggregation scheme has definitely been economically beneficial for participating farmers because they not only have higher vegetable production, but higher revenue and net income from selling the vegetables. But it's also interesting that loop farmers, although loop didn't necessarily have the nutrition when they were implementing their program, it does increase the food and nutrition security. And despite they not having the higher consumption at home, they have lower food insecurity and higher dietary diversity. So I would just, when we did our study, we didn't have a lot of female farmers there, but I think that would be the future work where we want to look into whether market inclusion empowers women and whether it makes them to increase their agency. And I would like to quote from a Maori proverb that what is the most important thing in the world? It is the people, it is the people, and it is the people. So my argument is all the aggregation services, although they have the economic argument in their forefront of decision making, I think it should come down to whether these aggregation services are helping the marginalized people, especially women. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nazman. That has been a great paper. I think we have all enjoyed it. We have seen propensity score matching, probates, and the fact that they have increased incomes for the loop farmers. Thank you very much, members. Let us put our questions in the chat boxes and also, in the chat boxes, and we will address them at the end of the sessions. Allow me now to invite Achana Sankara from GIZ to present on the influence of participation in multi-sectoral social behavior interventions on dietary diversity for women and children. This is a regression analysis of a follow-up survey data from India. So welcome, Chan.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening or good afternoon, everyone. And I'm from GIZ, and I also represent this global program on food and nutrition security and enhanced resilience, which is implemented in 10 countries in Asia and Africa. And it is an initiative under One World No Hunger and is supported by German Federal Ministry for Economic Development, also known as BMZ. So this is a study on the India country package, on where we see the impact of our intervention to improve food and nutrition security on the dietary diversity for women and children. Next slide, please. Yeah, so our program, now termed as Securing Nutrition and Enhancing Resilience, this has 2 phases. We are currently in the 2nd phase, and this represents the evaluation of the 1st phase. And we call it follow-up survey. And in the 1st phase, we had 144,000 women and 30,000 young children who were part of this intervention. And now we have almost 280,000 women who will be followed up in this phase of 2021 to 2025. And as I say, the goal is to improve the nutrition situation of nutritionally insecure people, especially women of reproductive age and small children. The next slide, please, Lauren. Yeah, our project interventions that were there in the last phase mainly was the capacity strengthening of Anganwadi workers, who are also known as the rural health workers in India, and how they can be trained to improve the diet diversity of women and children in this area. So they were given a rigorous training on a participatory session known as participatory learning approach, where sessions on feeding interventions, on nutrition, hygiene were systematically given in a long session of like in a 20 sessions period, where they were systematically, their capacity and their knowledge and behavior were improved. And also, we also had this concept of home nutrition garden or homestead garden, which was piloted. And then we also had this big, large-scale community nutrition gardens, where the community worked together under self-help group and to have a better provision of fruits and vegetables in their diet. And then we had also the optimal hygiene practices were promoted as part of the intervention. The next slide, please. Yes, this objective of this follow-up survey is that the dietary diversity of this of the women are improved, and that of children are improved, and almost by 5 to 10%, and also by 1 food group among women, and overall nutrition governance is also improved. The next slide. Yeah, and for this presentation, we mainly focused on the hypothesis testing, where we had this global hypothesis where we assumed that the participation in GIZ interventions that I just described contribute to better food security and diet diversity in terms of IDDS, which is known as Individual Dietary Diversity Score, or MAD, Minimum Acceptable Diet for Children, or the Hafiz, which is the food access or the food security scale. And then we had this concept of multi-sectoral hypothesis, which meant that participation in different GIZ interventions like hygiene, like nutrition, and like agricultural production contribute to better food security and diet diversity compared to participation in only one GIZ intervention type. And then for the behavioral change hypothesis, this indicated that participation in activities which directly support behavioral change have a higher likelihood to practice the promoted behaviors than which participate in who participate in other activities like one-way behavioral change. So, which means the social behavioral change, which generally promotes two-way behavioral change, like like a interactive training program or something like this, where or the cooking demonstration, where both are involved. That has a better chance to have a behavior change. The next slide, please. Yeah, the methodology was that of a quantitative household survey of women who attended PLA or the participatory learning approach. And then the sampling strategy was a two-stage random sampling, and the data was collected through a mixed method, mainly through a quantitative, but also qualitative data was also collected. And then along with this comparative chi-square analysis, we also did multivariate regression analysis using these two dependent variables of MAD and ITTS. And also because this intervention was affected, this data collection was affected by the outbreak of COVID in India. And so we had actually a combined two district analysis of this data set, and we did not go to individual data set, individual district data. The next slide, please. Yeah, I will now quickly go to the findings. The next slide, please. Yeah, on the socio-demographic data, we can see that these three groups, the baseline was done in 2016, and then we had the intervention group where the intervention was done in Shiopur and Chhatarpur, and then there was a control district known as the Panna district in Madhya Pradesh. And the project intervention mainly focused on the vulnerable groups, and they also in India they have this scheduled tribes and scheduled caste who may generally fall in this vulnerable group. So it mainly focused on these three groups. And then with the schooling and you can see that number of household members were almost similar in all the groups. Yeah. Then the next slide. When we focus on the women's dietary diversity, we see that the GIZ intervention had actually improved the dietary diversity of women by more than one food group, and we can see that IDDS has moved from 3.6 to 5.3, and this was statistically significant at less than 0.01 p. And similarly, the MDDW, which is also known as the share of or the percentage of women who have achieved the minimum IDDS, has also improved quite significantly from 19.9% to almost 60% in the intervention group, and it was also statistically higher than the control group. The next slide, please. Yeah, in the children nutrition has also improved, but yeah, it still did not reach the 32% value which we targeted in the project, and we could improve from 17% to 27.6%. And MAD is a global indicator of both the meal frequency and the minimum dietary diversity. So the MAD is an overall reflection of child nutrition. Yeah, so the next slide. We see that with age, the MAD and the minimum acceptable diet, the minimum meal frequency, everything improved, which again showed that the vulnerable age group was still not starting the complementary feeding in time, and also had less diverse food, that is the 6 to 11 months, which showed that again, there's a much higher need to focus in this age group in this phase. Yeah, and the next, yeah. And then the Hafiz, which is also known as the Household Food Insecurity Experience Scale, which measures the food insecurity in the last 3 months. Again, it showed that the project intervention had some effect on mitigating the food crisis, that we can see that it was both at baseline and intervention at a higher Hafiz as compared to control. And similarly, the mildly and moderately food insecure also has the similar kind of findings. The next slide, please. Yeah, now we go to the findings and hypothesis. We can see that participation by intervention cluster was quite high, although the frequent participation hovered around 50%. And these interventions we clustered, they are mainly part of the PLA or the participatory learning approach. So we clustered them basically on the sessions, which were somewhere hygiene, somewhere on social behavioral oriented nutrition, somewhere social behavior oriented hygiene related intervention, somewhere just one-way nutrition related intervention. Yeah, so the next slide, please. Yeah, I just move quickly now, Nadine. Yeah, as I said, the global intervention hypothesis is kind of fulfilled, that this related to a statistically improved in dietary diversity. Next slide, please. Yeah, the behavioral change hypothesis also showed that the women who participated in the hygiene practices and the social behavioral oriented hygiene-related practices had a higher chance of achieving MAD as compared to other women, whereas market orientation and participation in agriculture-related intervention had a opposite. Next slide. Yeah, again, the similar finding was shown when we did analysis on the food secure and mildly food insecure household. Yeah, the next slide. It's almost a similar. And the multisectoral hypothesis again showed that participation in the agricultural production had a positive impact on women's nutrition, but it had a negative impact on the children's nutrition, which could be because that women had not much time to feed the children if they were quite busy, and if there's not another caretaker involved there or present there, then it can lead to actually lower nutritional status of children. Also, market orientation, which means that they were selling their products, also had a negative impact on the on achieving MAD. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, the overall conclusion showed that the overall nutrition situation by this GIZ intervention significantly improved in both women and children, although MAD and MDD was not very clear because we did not see a significant as compared to control. 6 to 11 months, as I said, they were the vulnerable period. The improvement could be attributed to the higher consumption of vitamin A rich fruit and dark green leafy vegetables. And yeah, and although these home gardens, they promoted access, but usage was still quite sporadic, and the participation still needs to improve. Yeah, and yeah, that is the overall finding of this study. Yeah, maybe I can end here, Mark.
Thank you very much, Chana. Yes, we see that the interventions have really improved the situation in terms of data diversity and even the food groups, you know. So the project appears to have really succeeded. Members, let us keep posting our questions in the chat, and we will look at them at the end of the presentation. So thank you very much. Let us have our next presenter, who is Tomeo Bodier from CIRAD, and the presentation is on testing the separation of production and consumption in farm households, and this is about the impact of a pulse promotion program in Bahir, India. Welcome, Tomeo. Yeah, yes.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
So my name is Tomoe Bourdier, and I currently work as an economist at CIRAD, the French Agricultural Research Center for International Development. This study, conducted in collaboration with Caitlin Kieran, Travis Liebert, and Ashish Shenoy at UC Davis, explores the links between food production, consumption, and nutrition in farm households by leveraging randomized control study evaluating the impact of a large-scale agricultural extension program in northern Bihar in India. Nutrition-sensitive agricultural interventions are often designed on the premise that increasing the production of nutritious foods will also increase the consumption of these same foods by the households that produce them. Yet the economic theory of household decisions predicts that with functioning markets, the farm household consumption decisions should be separable, or in other words, independent from its production decisions. Meanwhile, existing reviews of the impact of agricultural programs on the nutritional outcomes of target households present mixed evidence. Many studies, most of which rely on quasi-experiments or observational data, suffer from significant methodological limitations, which may hamper their ability to detect program effects. Maybe poor evaluation designs, indigeneity issues, inadequate sample sizes, short duration, etc. In response to the political imperative to address the growing trade deficit in pulses by augmenting domestic supplies in India, a multi-year program was rolled out in 5 districts of northern Bihar, funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and implemented by the Aga Khan Foundation. It was rolled out in 5 districts of northern Bihar with the goal to increase the prevalence and the productivity of pulse cultivation in the region. The package of interventions included subsidized seeds, hands-on extension support, and demonstration plots. The villages selected to be part of the evaluation were randomly assigned treatment or control status, and farmers in these villages were treated accordingly. To ensure comparability across treatment and control arms, we randomly selected a sample of farmers in each village from a list of individuals who attended initial meetings intended to gather their interest in pulse production. Because these meetings were conducted identically in both treatment and control villages to introduce the pulse production project and to initiate the formation of farmer groups, farmers attending these meetings are plausibly compared. Detailed surveys were repeated annually among a total of 1,009 farm households, and they were comprised of 2 instruments. The agricultural questionnaire administered the household member in charge of most decisions related to agricultural production in the household, captured household socioeconomic and demographic characteristics, information on plots and crops cultivated in the 2 main growing seasons. The food and nutrition questionnaire was administered to the main household member in charge of food preparation, generally a female household member, and was designed to capture household and individual food consumption in addition to household composition, food security indicators, household storage of food grains, and indicators of women's empowerment. A semi-quantitative household food frequency questionnaire was used, in which uncooked food items were directly weighed by the enumerator and combined with self-reported measure of food distribution between household members to derive estimates of individual dietary intake. The randomized nature of the treatment assignment allows for unbiased estimation of the impact of the program interventions on a set of production and consumption outcomes, as we'll see on the next slide. I pull year 1 and year 2 data and estimate year-specific treatment effects using an intention to treat specification. This was a 3-year program. We find that the program induced the adoption of pulse cultivation, both on the extensive and intensive margins. So the number of the treatment increased the number of farmers cultivating pulses in treatment villages, and it increased the area cultivated under pulses. And consequently, we also see a modest increase in pulse production. The intervention appears to have succeeded in stretching households' pulse stock through the lean season by several weeks, but did not lead to a measurable increase in pulse consumption 9 months post-harvest, so measured 9 months after the main pulse harvest at the household level. However, in contrast, the intervention had a positive effect on the daily protein intake, estimated daily protein intake of a female household member in charge of food preparation, or a female respondent. Analysis of heterogeneous effects reveal that households in the treatment group were more likely to increase their pulse production if they were higher in the wealth distribution, and if their female members were involved in decisions related to agricultural production and post-harvest marketing. So how much to sell, how much to keep for household consumption, etc., that kind of decisions. We also find that the female respondent was more likely to see her protein intake improve as a result of the intervention in the treatment villages if her preference for pulses was stronger than that of her male partner, which we measured through standard willingness to pay experiment. In conclusion, while nutrition-sensitive agricultural interventions are becoming increasingly popular, the extent to which they can improve the nutrition of farm households depends crucially on our understanding of how these households may or may not adjust their food consumption in response to such external shifters of production, such as extension support. While most of the existing evidence focuses on the household as the unit of analysis, non-separabilities between production and consumption can be observed at different scales. So as you can see on the graph, at the one end of the spectrum, at the market level, production changes may trigger consumption changes if the supply of food commodities increases to the point that their market prices start to fall for the benefit of all consumers in an economy, not just the farmers. At the village level, production changes may directly impact consumption patterns through in-kind sharing of crops, for example. And what's of interest to us in the study is at the other end of the spectrum, intra-household dynamics and individual preferences within the household, although rarely studied in the context of separation of production and consumption decisions, may influence the relationship between those outcomes. In settings with strong gender norms around responsibilities in household agricultural activities, where farm production and marketing primarily fall under the scope of control of men, women with more bargaining power may still influence household production decisions, as we saw. And in spite of strong qualitative evidence that decisions regarding food expenditures, especially in this part of India, are often also male dominated, women in charge of food preparation may exert some control over the composition of their diet, even as food preferences differ between household members. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tomeo, for that presentation. I bet you have taken a few more minutes from us, but nonetheless, we will try to recover them. It is a good presentation. In this region and other parts of the world, we know the importance of pulses, and we see there was, increased adoption and also extended availability of these pulses in the households, which is great. Without taking more time, let us have our fourth presenter, who is Diana Dolman from McGill University. The presentation is on critical steps for enrollment, participation, and success in a nutrition-sensitive agriculture intervention in rural Ghana. Welcome, Diana.
Okay, I'm unmuted. So long time with Zoom and still trying to figure it out. Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you everyone for being here. I'm very excited to present the results of our qualitative study that evaluated participation in a nutrition-sensitive agriculture intervention, which took place in rural Ghana. The sound is working?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great.
Fine.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. Okay, so the study I will be presenting took place in the Upper Maniak Robo, which is a mainly rural and underserved district in the eastern region of Ghana. The study is embedded within the Nutrition Links, which was a 12-month cluster randomized controlled trial that recruited women with children less than 18 months old and was designed to occur in 2 rounds. The first one took place in 2016 and the second in 2017. The intervention arm enrolled 287 women for baseline across the 2 rounds in the 19 intervention communities. Women who were able to prepare their chicken coops on time received 30 to 40 poultry for egg production, depending on the round of the project, which they were expected to repay to cover the cost of the inputs of the following round. In addition, women also received vines and seeds for their gardens and weekly nutrition education meetings. The 213 women in the control communities continue to receive standard of care services from the government. Of the women who enrolled in the baseline in intervention communities, 233 were able to finish their chicken coops on time and they received birth, and we will refer to them as participants from now on. And to those 54 women who were not able to finish their chicken coops as non-participants. At endline, the intervention improved children's minimum diverse diet and length for age and height for HC scores, and also weight for HC scores. So now to the study that I will be presenting. This qualitative study aimed to understand the barriers and facilitators to enroll, participate, and succeed in nutrition links. We used in-depth interviews and focus group discussions to collect our data at the end of each round of the nutrition links. First, we interviewed women who received poultry, and they were selected based on the project participation level, which was assessed by a composite score that evaluated 5 criteria. Those were attendance to weekly meetings, egg production, payment of inputs, contribution during meetings, and relationship to other group members. We used the same criteria to select the communities. We interviewed 17 women in the first round and 16 women at the end of the second round. At the end of the project, we also had focus group discussions with women from both rounds to see how they identified successful participants and what determined their success. Also, at the end of the first round, we interviewed women who did not receive birds to understand what hindered their participation. And finally, we also interviewed opinion leaders of the intervention communities and field staff in charge of the weekly educations to triangulate our findings. Participant and non-participant women did not differ in age, marital status, and education level, but participant women were less likely to have no occupation and more likely to be traders than non-participants. We tape recorded all interviews, and they were translated verbatim and transcribed, and the transcriptions of the in-depth interviews were coded and analyzed in MaxQDA and the focus group discussions in NVivo. We used thematic analysis to summarize the data, and we systematized the results using the sociological model of behavior. We found that the poultry component was central to women's participation, so that this component will be the focus of this presentation. This is the conceptual framework that emerged from the data for enrollment. On the left side are the levels of the sociological models that were relevant for women's enrollment. And just to clarify, the icons that you see in the bottom represent the pool of people who were part of the inquiry for each topic. The main barrier to enroll was the cost of the initial inputs, which was considered high by most of the women. Whereas the main facilitators to enroll were the perceived benefits, such as economic gain and being able of taking care of their children. Women from the second round were driven to enroll mainly based on the benefits they observed from previous participants. Social support, especially from husbands, was paramount to be able to enroll. Men had a key role in building the chicken coops and also in providing economic support for materials. Some women said that they were able to enroll even without their husband's support by hiring a carpenter and doing side jobs in order to be able to pay for the inputs. So this is the framework for participation, which, as you can see, is more complex than the previous. And for sake of time, I will go only through the most important aspects. But here I would like you to note that the outcomes of participations, now highlighted in yellow, fed back into participation. The community infrastructure was reported as a barrier by all interviewees. Everyone talked about how the bad conditions of the road hampered their access to markets. The cost of the chicken coop was a major deterrent to participate, but the fact that the project brought it to the communities was seen as a facilitator. Social support to take care of the chickens was also very important, especially considering that the birds cannot be left alone for a long time. Not following the project's recommendation was reported as an important barrier by opinion leaders and by nutrition link staff, but not by women. When women talk about individual aspects, they mainly talk about how they had to manage their time in order to be able to take care of the birds in addition to other household activities. And this is just to show an example about how immediate outcome like egg production fed back into participation. In this case, we have a nutrition link staff telling us that women who had more eggs felt proud and they were more likely to show up during the weekly meetings. Successful participants were primarily seen as those who invested money at the end of the project. Some of them invested in buying new flocks of birds and some others in other livestock. They had more financial skills, and during their participation, their children looked healthier and went to school. They dressed better and they improved their communication skills. And through those improvements they were also respected by the community members. As mentioned earlier, the poultry component was central to women's participation. And we identified 4 major steps to this component, where each step acts as a barrier or a facilitator to the next. We qualitatively represent the importance of each level of the socio-ecological model within the barriers in faded colors and the facilitators in bold. And as you can see, the relevance of the socio-ecological model levels vary between barriers and facilitators and between the different steps. For example, the environment, which is specifically weather in this case, was only mentioned to negatively affect egg production, whereas interpersonal aspects were important barriers and facilitators for each of the steps. Finally, to be successful, it was important for this cycle to not be interrupted. To summarize, perceived and observed benefits increased the adoption of nutrition-sensitive agriculture interventions. In addition to personal characteristics, environmental aspects such as weather, physical conditions such as the roads, and interpersonal relationships all influence participation in nutrition-sensitive interventions. Programs need to understand and support the critical steps of participation in nutrition-sensitive agriculture interventions to increase the likelihood of success of their beneficiaries. And with this, I end the presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Diana. That is an interesting presentation. Chicken, is very important in the in our economies. They are really nutrition sensitive, and that is great. Quite an interactive presentation. Let us then go to our last presentation. I hope members, you are not tired already. Please pay attention to this last presentation by Kathleen Harrington from Michigan State University. And it is on Bangladeshi consumers' willingness to pay for rice with improved nutrition via fortified zinc rice and decreased milling practices. Welcome, Kathleen. You have 8 minutes.
Thank you so much. Can you see the correct slide? I've tried to swap them so you're seeing the actual presentation mode.
We can see.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. So as Mark said, I'm Caitlin Harrington. I'm a PhD student at Michigan State University currently, but I began this work in my previous job before coming back to school at the International Food Policy Research Institute. But today I'll be sharing about consumers' willingness to pay for high zinc and low milled rice in Bangladesh. So this motivation, many of you do not need at all. So I'll keep it brief, but of course, zinc deficiency is considered a severe public health issue in Bangladesh, and around 30% of Bangladeshis are at risk of inadequate zinc intake. In particular, the most vulnerable, not a surprise to any of us, are children under 5 years of age and women of childbearing age. So the best way to address these zinc needs is through a nice diet diversity, but unfortunately most Bangladeshis, especially in the rural areas where we conducted the study, cannot afford or don't have access to such a diet. Rice is the staple good for consumption, and so we looked at 2 interventions to increase zinc through rice. So the first is through a genetic seed grain, conventionally bred to have higher levels of zinc. So that's biofortified high zinc rice. Same agronomic and consumption traits as the most popular varieties. They're almost available throughout the entire country. And then currently, the biofortified rice has around 70% more zinc content than non-biofortified rice when milled at the exact same levels. So now we switch to our other intervention that we examined, so processing, and we look at consumption of low milled rice and willingness to pay for it. So the traditional method in Bangladesh is to mill around 7.5%. So that's just like the brown rice is gone, and that's the base level there. But more automatic rice mills are popping up all throughout the country, and they're milling upwards of 15 to 16%. So that's the highest level that the grain can be milled. So when you think of white, shiny, polished rice. That's what you get from milling at that level. However, when that happens, as the milling happens, zinc is removed as well as some other nutrients. But comparing low milled to high milled rice, the low milled rice has around 200% more zinc than the high milled rice. So we had three main research questions that we looked at in the study. The first was, what are consumers' acceptance and demand for low milled and biofortified rice? Second, does sharing nutritional information impact consumers' acceptance and demand of these products? And then third, what determinants exist, if any, for biofortified and low milled rice premiums beyond just information itself? So in terms of our study area and data, we surveyed 576 consumers, and we split the consumers half and half in the Dinajpur district, which was in the north. It's a rice surplus producing district. And then we compared it against Satkhira in the south, so a rice deficit producing district. We tried to randomize at every stage of the process, so we ensured balance as much as possible. And I should note that this willingness to pay study or experiment followed up a consumer sensory evaluation that was conducted by my food science colleague. In terms of our methodology, we conducted a between subject willingness to pay experiment using the BDM method. And then we had three rice grains we looked at. So first was the biofortified low milled rice. The second was non-biofortified low milled rice. And then the third was non-biofortified high milled rice. And we had three groups. The first was a control group where no information was given. The second was our treatment group 1, and they received nutritional information on zinc biofortified rice. And then the third group was our treatment group 2, which received nutritional information for low milled rice. In terms of our empirical framework, we just started by comparing mean differences and willingness to pay bids. Secondly, then we did some short and long regressions to determine that significance of treatment effect, because we couldn't get it straight from mean differences. And then third, we looked at marginal willingness to pay. So we wanted to see what determinants or premiums or discounts there were for these products of interest beyond just the information treatments itself. In terms of looking at biofortified low milled versus non-biofortified low milled, we see that there's an initial slight premium for the biofortified rice, but once information is shared on nutrition about that rice, the premium increases by about 6%, leaving us with an effect size of information around 4.5%, and this translated to 1.5 taka essentially. Looking at willingness to pay for non-biofortified low milled rice versus high milled rice, you see a big difference there. I'm sure you're noticing that. So the preferred rice in Bangladesh is that nice, shiny, white polished rice. And so there's a deep discount given initially when no information is shared for the low milled rice. However, once that information is shared around about the nutrition for the low milled rice, that discount does shrink a little bit, and so it leaves us with an effect size of around 4.1%, and this translated to 1.78 taka premium. So looking at our marginal willingness to pay, so for biofortified low milled rice compared to non-biofortified low milled rice, when no information is presented, premiums exist if the respondent was female, if the respondent resided in the Dinajpur district, and that was the rice surplus producing district, and it increased as the household per capita yearly rice consumption increased. Discounts were found when no information was presented to respondents for the biofortified low milled rice as the number of children in the household increased, 5 years of age or younger, and if the respondent's main occupation was farming. Once we did introduce the information, we saw a change from negative to positive for the number of children in the household 5 years of age or younger. Looking at the non-biofortified low milled versus high milled rice, when no information was shared, there is a premium given to the low milled rice as the number of children in the household increased, and then discounts exist as the respondent ages, as the years of formal education attained increases, and if the household purchased rice less frequently. So for us, that was monthly or every 2 months. Once information was shared, we see a change again here for the low milled versus high milled rice, and that's a shift from a discount to a premium for years of formal education of the respondent. In terms of conclusions and policies, we do see that consumers respond to nutrition information when stating their willingness to pay, but it's going to be a much easier route to increase zinc intake through consumption of biofortified rice versus low-milled rice, just giving that strong cultural preference for the high-milled rice. Recommendations for initial awareness campaigns for biofortified zinc rice is rice surplus, targeting areas that are rice surplus producing regions, non-farm workers, females, and families with children under 5 years of age. And the recommendations for initial awareness campaigns targeting consumption of low-milled rice include individuals with higher education, families with children under 5, and then households that purchase rice more frequently than monthly. And then finally, thinking about our future research, middle ground of 11% evaluating at that point for zinc intake as well as maybe consumer preferences would be a great point. We like to evaluate what type and how the information is shared. We'd love to conduct the experiment in peri-urban or urban areas, as this study was all conducted in rural areas. And we're hoping that this study can serve as a benchmark as rice fortification at the processing end is having a recent push in Bangladesh. And thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen, for that presentation. Quite precise. I think you are on time. I take home the message that we need some kind of awareness campaign for these biofortified rice. So I think without much ado, we will go to the question and answer session. And we will begin by looking at our chat box so that we see the kind of questions that you have the participants have posed. And with that, let me check. So I do hope that we still have one of our presenters who had indicated that she would be leaving early. That is Tomeo. Tomeo, are you still here? If you are here, we have a question for you. And it is from Aditi Roy. It is saying, in all the presentations, women's work participation really is puzzling. Did you look at the women's social support or child care support?
They are not here.
She's not here.
Apologies. Yeah, they are.
All right. So, okay. Maybe just for the interest of other presenters, if you are able to maybe make an intervention, it's fine. So the question is, did you look at the women's social support and or child care support, and if that makes any difference? It looks quite specific, so we may skip it anyway. So let us then go to the first presenter, and that is Nazmoon. We have a question from Grace, and she's asking, is there any concern about a delay in payment for farmers by the aggregators, and whether a delay has a positive or a negative impact on food security, as well as a bias as to which farmers can afford to participate? So Nazmoon, I don't know whether that's clear. Can I come again?
No, that's okay. I read it as well. Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the question. So I didn't get time to explain how Loop works. So each farmer has a mobile phone is quite popular in Bangladesh. So this works with an app. So the aggregators, like I have said, that they're selected by the farmers themselves. So there is a issue of trust that is in terms of their trust on the person definitely is there, that there would be no opportunistic behavior on them. And the farmers also receive information about the prices in the market. And once the aggregators take the produce to the market, after they have sold, they send that receipt to the farmers. And by sending that receipt, that's an app where the other part of the study look into that transaction as well. And the aggregators get a commission. So that is their incentive to take part. And when we did our survey, we also saw that a lot of the aggregators were unemployed who are in the villages who were lucky and feeling privileged to take part. So there is not as such the problem with the delay. And with the food security impact, we didn't necessarily look into the whether that delay, because of the mechanism, we didn't necessarily relate to that with the food security outcome. I hope you I understand. I answer your question.
Yes, I hope Grace has gotten it. If she has a follow-up question, she can just put it in the chat and then we will bring it back to you. Thank you very much, Nazmun. Let us have a question for Achana, and this is from Matema. And the question is, in the GIZ project, how can the negative impacts on the MAD and MDD because of the increased market participation and agriculture production be addressed? I think it's not quite clear in terms of construction, but the question is, there are some negative impacts on the MAD and MDD, and then how can this be addressed?
Yeah, I get the question, Mark. Yeah, what we found is that the MAD and MDD, like which are the child nutrition indicators, and MAD is the global indicator of the dietary diversity, and the child feeding, like how many times the child was fed. So we found that MAD and MDD actually did not improve in those women who had to go out for the agricultural work. It showed a little, not a very positive relationship with MAD and MDD. Probably could be because they were engaged in farm. Also, because sometimes there was not an additional caretaker to take care of the child. And also because in this age group, 6 to 11 months, there was also a drop in achieving the required MAD and MDD. Like, the complementary feeding also started little late as compared to and the diet diversity was also lower in this age group. So coupled with this, when the woman, went for agricultural production, we found that, the increasing workload, and also those who had a higher market orientation, we found that those families were less likely to achieve the MAD or the minimum acceptable diet for child nutrition.
Thank you very much, Achana. I think that is sufficient and clear. So then let us pose a question to Caitlin. And the question is from Hai. And the question is, the BDM mechanism is quite complex. How did your team explain it to the participants? And during the explanation, do you encourage them to reveal their true willingness to pay? Finally, a little more about technical thing. How did you randomly draw the random price? So there are many questions, Caitlin. Just break it down and answer one by one. How did your team explain to the participants the concept of BDM? During explanation, do you encourage them to reveal their true willingness to pay? Finally, about how did you randomly draw the random price? Thank you. Welcome, Caitlin.
Great, thanks so much. And thanks for the question. Yes, BDM is quite complex, and we ended up using BDM simply because the participants were already in a central location for the consumer sensory evaluation that my colleague conducted. And so that's why we used that, as people could come and go as they finished each portion instead of doing a real auction. So we went over this and the BDM mechanism many times with the enumerators to make sure they didn't have any questions. We piloted it many times and so forth. But with the respondents themselves, the enumerators explained it. The respondents were encouraged to ask questions if they had any at any time. And there was a practice round that they conducted with the respondents with like local biscuits that were very well known to the respondents. And so that was a trial first for them to understand the entire process. During the experiments, let me follow the next question. Oh, during the explanation, yes, we did encourage them to reveal their true price. They were told that they would receive a participation fee at the end of the study, and that if they won, meaning their bid was higher than the market price, that they would pay the market price and they would actually get to take that kg of whichever grain they won home. And we did tell them there was only one binding bid, so they didn't have to worry about having to pay 3. So there was just one of the grains that would be selected randomly. And then for the final question, the randomly drawn price, so that we collaborated very closely with colleagues from the Bangladesh Rice Research Institute. And so we worked with some ag extension agents in the areas that we were doing the study in to obtain the range of prices from the local markets for the different varieties that we were looking at and milling levels. And so from that, we had a range of about 12 prices. And it was all in a bag you couldn't see through. And so the consumer, or excuse me, the respondent just stuck their hand in and they drew out the price. And so that's how we then compared against their stated willingness to pay. But happy to talk through this more if you want. I can put my email in the chat for you.
Thank you, Kathleen. I think you have tackled it very well, so it should be sufficient. Thank you. Let us have a question to Diana. And the question is from Sarah, saying, since your findings highlight the importance of men's involvement in building COPE, would you say that it's important for NSA interventions to engage men in their projects?
Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to answer that question on the chat, but it's a bit complex to, to write it down. Definitely, but I think, I mean, not only for the findings that we had in this study, but also from previous studies. And I know that Nutrition Links had, like one of the rounds had beehives for men as a way to engage them. But I think that was not so well monitored in the end, but definitely I would suggest to engage. And I think that the perceived benefits are also important. I did not interview men during my interviews, and I regret not having done that. But I think it would be interesting to see what benefits they perceive and what motivates them to help women. So maybe further research can look into that, because it was mentioned that if men saw that there was income, then they would allow women to go to the meetings. Whereas if you don't have income, they would say, you know, you have to join me to come to the farm instead of going to those weekly meetings. So I think that will be interesting to look further. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another round for Nazmoon. The question comes from Deepak. It says, do you think the time has come to bring food and nutrition security to the center stage, as well as income generation, to add economic benefits? How your study contribute to these needs? So how did your study contribute to these needs? Nazmoon, please.
Thank you, Deepak. That's an interesting question. And as I concluded my presentation, I quoted a proverb from Maori, and that people should be at the center. And I think we are gradually shifting there, not yet in many of the developing countries, where we see that rather than empowering people through income generation, it is about enabling them with better education and better knowledge about nutrition, and especially women come to the center, a kind of center of all this decision making. So as I have highlighted in our study, we did not have enough women farmers who have taken part. So it was not possible to look into how that would have an impact, women farmers, and the difference between male and female farmers. So it would have been nice to have that number of women farmers to do that. But definitely we are trying to highlight that the perceived way does contribute, that income generation can lead to better data diversity. But if we want to look into the decision-making process, which would have even more consumption from their own production, that may not happen with this kind of intervention. But definitely next studies, we can think of that. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for that. Another round for Diana. And we have a question from Aishat. The question is, I am curious if the percent of successful women was higher among women in male adult households versus women in female-only households because of that male support. So was there, difference in success based on the male support?
For what women mentioned in the focus group discussions, they said that men had like very determinant role either in being successful or in not being successful. I can think about some examples of women who were extremely successful and who were able to continue participating in the second round who were actually single mothers. So I think this question is very interesting, and it brings me to think about maybe analyzing further into the quantitative data and see the compositions of the households, because even though marital status was not different, but it would be good to see if there were other, let's say, adult or close to adulthood males in the household who could have supported. Thank you.
Oh, it is becoming very lively. Questions are just coming in, So another round for Achana. From Sarah, she's asking, regarding the PLA approach, why do you think the participatory sessions were especially successful with women? Did you employ specific techniques to achieve this level of participation? Achana.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark, for this question. Yes, PLA was quite a dynamic approach where a lot of participatory methods were used, and where the women and the facilitator, who was the Anganwadi worker and who was extensively trained in this method. So the PLA was like, it was consistent, and it included 4 phases where there was an understanding of the problem, and where the community jointly worked with the Anganwadi worker in designing the solutions, and very interesting activities like cooking demonstration, like involving men in nutrition, and also like understanding what is malnutrition, how to improve the hygiene practices through cards, through games, through videos, and through all these things are used in this PLA approach to improve the nutrition knowledge and practices among the beneficiaries. So I think that's what we think, that this participatory learning approach actually had a significant effect on the outcomes that we observed in our project.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we are, getting our time. We are almost done. We have one more question, but just to alert you that probably this will be the last one. If you have other questions, I think what we will do is probably engage now bilaterally. Diana, a question from Prerana. Hi, Diana. You mentioned the standard care services provided by the government to the control group. What did it involve?
Thank you for the question. And there was a child community growth monitoring, which happens monthly at the communities. And then the Ministry of Health, Agriculture also has extended extension services in case people need it. But yeah, I think.
Yes, so members, I think we are just on time. What do you think, members? Do we have another one question? Okay, the final one. Nazmoon from Ravi, thank you for your rice presentation. What kind of transaction arrangements exist between producer and aggregators to deal with opportunistic behavior of parties when higher or lower prices exist outside of aggregation? transaction arrangements when we have different prices, you know, within the aggregation and outside aggregation. Nazmur,
Yeah,
please.
sure.
Yes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for your question. As I have described that the farmers get price information through their app before they give it to the aggregators, and aggregators are taking those vegetables and fruits to the market to sell on behalf of the farmers. And because it is assumed that the aggregators are better in negotiation and have bigger produce to sell, so they get a better price compared to the farmers. We didn't necessarily see that the other characteristics, the socioeconomic characteristics were a bit different between loop and non-loop farmers, but in terms of whether we didn't have any information on whether there were other venues that they were trying to sell. In some cases, farmers sell both to the aggregators and they have some farm gate sales option as well. I hope I answered your question, but I'm happy to elaborate the process in an email as well.
Good, thank you very much. I am really excited. I initially thought that the presentations would not elicit a lot of questions, but it has really been engaging. Thank you very much, presenters. You have done great. Thank you, participants. You have really asked questions. I know we are better than when we came in terms of the knowledge, and we have gained a lot. I don't have much more to say. I think this session has been great in terms of, you know, engaging on these interventions, agriculture and nutrition. It is a fertile research ground and also one that has implications, you know, on well-being. So very, very important. Let's continue generating research and implementing whatever comes out of these of our research. I will now hand over to the administrator to say a word, and then we say thank you very much, because I know she might want to comment about what is on the screen.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, really appreciate it. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who joined our session and listened, and to the speakers. Fantastic talks today, and I'm glad to see a lot of Q&A going on at the end. So I've pasted some information in the chat about other activities that are happening. Please join us for a plenary session in 15 minutes. And I've just launched a quick poll for your feedback, if you could please complete that. So yeah, thanks again, and enjoy the rest of your day, and I will end the meeting shortly. Thank you.